All right. Good morning, everyone. It is now 9 o'clock. I have put a link to our working draft in the chat box, so make sure that you click on that link. You'll be able to follow along to all of our edits and changes. I will just be using the suggested edit feature on Google so that we can keep what we already have, but see the edits that we're going to make to it as well. Gail and I are happy you guys are joining us today. We are very excited about having librarian input on the CKLS system plan. So Gail, I think, had a few discussion points to start with, and then we'll get going.
I did. Thank you, Mary Beth, for the intro, and Andy went ahead and sent out the link. For some reason, yours wasn't showing up in chat, so Andy shared it with me as well. One of the first things I need to say is we need to offer Mary Beth congratulations. Mary Beth is the Assistant Director of the Central Kansas Library System, and we've been so busy that we forgot to notify everybody of that. We did send out we shared that at last week's Summer Library Program Workshop, but this is the official announcement, and I am just really happy that Mary Beth is on board and part of our management team. I know she's going to do a stellar job. Who's here with us? Who is librarian? I don't know who all the participants are. Let's see what we've got. Oh, Patty is from home. Hayes.
Librarian is Minneapolis.
Okay. Margie, Andy. Oh, Dustin from Hayes, it looks like.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Center here as well.
And, Joanna was able to make it. Great.
And Lisa, I believe, from
Lucas. Okay,
and,
good.
Interlibrary Loan, I'm not sure who that is.
And who is Interlibrary Loan? Does anyone know?
You can type in the chat box if you
don't have a mic.
Yep.
Really, this meeting is for you. You've all had time to look at the system plan. You've seen some of the discussion online, and it seems to me that there are a couple of points that are of concern, or at least only a couple that we've heard of. One of the things that I learned last week at the State Library Advisory Board meeting is that there are certain key components that every system plan needs to have in it. Luckily, we've got that in this system plan, so that's why the rambling in the beginning, before we even get down to the meat of it, we need to explain who we are, what we do, who we do it for, and where we're located. That's the first part of it. I know one of the questions that I had was on page 2. The executive board consists of 10 to 14 members, at least 2 of whom shall be county appointees. Hi, Marla. And which also include 2 school librarians and 2 public librarians. The executive board meets monthly around the system. And right above that, at the very top of page 2, it's the last 2 sentences. This makes a 91-member full board. A quorum of 27 full system board members is needed to conduct the business of the system. That actually, I thought the numbers were wonky as well. That actually comes from the CKLS bylaws, and that's where that came from. I cannot now see my own screen.
I shared my screen that's showing.
Okay, so it shows where it is.
Yeah.
There. Okay, good. So that is, to me, it seemed pretty arbitrary. Other systems have that the quorum is whoever's present at the meeting. That might be better. I don't know if that'll make a difference. Andy's helping me. He's got the mouse. It doesn't matter. So that is something that's from our bylaws. That's why the numbers are wonky. We used to not have a full 91-member board. That 27 was slightly more than half, or it is just more than half of the public libraries. But now that we have school districts on board with representation, that's where it bumped up to 91. We are changing some of the things in the CKLS bylaws in conjunction with the system plan. That's going before our own executive committee Wednesday, and then if they approve those bylaw changes, those will go to the full system board meeting in May for the full system board to vote to approve or not approve those bylaw changes. Mostly the bylaw changes have to do with language. There was still a lot in there about governor's appointee.
You're beautiful.
Oh, hello, Patty. Who are you? Patty, I think you're talking to all of us, and why thank you for noticing how beautiful I am this morning. So that's where that comes from. That can be something that we change in the future if that comes from the full system board. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted everyone to see this, is so that it is not a surprise, so that you all have input and can air your concerns, or we can open it up for discussion. So thank you for sharing, Mary Beth. Somebody else can certainly talk.
I also wanted to say that Steve Coomer, our administrative manager, he was able to do the direct deposit to most of our libraries. You should see them in your bank account today. We had one library that we didn't have the direct deposit information for, so we're getting that one sorted out. So your first half of your 2017 earned system grant, which you receive in 2018, should be in your bank accounts.
That's exciting to have it that quickly, and no running to the bank to make deposits or things like
returning the receipt that we used to put on the letter saying that you got it.
There was some, it's not confusion. It's always a process to work through the system plan, the system grant questionnaires that with the 3 different forms that our libraries submit every January, and reconcile that with the spreadsheet. One of the reasons that we decided to change the system plan was because it was so confusing, and it takes a great deal of time for librarians to fill out, and it takes even longer for CKLS to validate what you filled out against what we know exists or doesn't exist. And that was one of the reasons for the change. We can't make the format of the old system plan any simpler without changing everything up. Does anybody have any questions? I know that there were a couple of points brought up, but I'm going to let everybody talk for a little bit or type in. It's hard for me to be patient with that. I feel like I need to fill the air. Sorry.
I am not seeing any come in, but Andy is watching the chat for us. So if you still have something and you just haven't got it typed, he will stop us and make sure that we address those questions. But we'll just go ahead and start going through. First, we want to do the brief overview. We've spelled out our goals here. Let me get to the top. Starting on page 2, you will see the goals and objectives. And our whole point is to have our goals and objectives reflected in our standards, which are...
And they should also reflect directly to our budgeting.
Directly to our budgeting and what we offer at CKLS. These should kind of verify or show what we do. So when someone goes, what is it that CKLS does? It's reflected right here in the goals and objectives.
Or I think more importantly, when we're questioned about why, if you stop right here, stop scrolling, why we spend so much money on the courier, it reflects back to the fact that we support resource sharing and we subsidize the courier because it enhances and in fact even makes possible resource sharing for member libraries, and it is an efficient way to share resources. So that's, you know, you can see that specific thing. Why do we have rotating collections? It's because we share resources and we provide print and digital format. The digital format points directly to the money that CKLS invests annually in Sunflower eLibrary on behalf of our libraries.
Exactly. Thank you, Gail.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have any questions about the goals, go ahead and type those or ask those now. I'm not going to read through them because you've had the chance to do so, but if there's any one specifically you would like to address, I'd be happy to talk about it.
One of the things that we, like I'd explained, that we did with the goals is tie them to what we're currently doing, what we're currently subsidizing, and things that we need to move to in the future. One of them is providing financial support. I know that Joanna, she sent me a long letter last night and I didn't get the chance to reply to it this morning, Joanna, but I will someday this week. I've got meetings all day today and Wednesday I'm on the road, but I will find time to reply to those. Joanna was concerned about the organization of the document, the way that we...
Gail has frozen. Can everybody else hear me, or is it me? Are we all down? Okay. Hello.
We dropped.
Yep, that's all right. Let's see, I'll start recording. All right, let me get the screen back up and we'll just go again.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
I have to put my mouse away again. The last standard talks about specifically why we're able to give a conference grant, why we're able to give CE grants to our libraries, and why your CKLS staff then is able to go to conferences and come back with content that we share out to you. I think that the goals were very clear and straightforward. If we move on to the competitive grants, no, first we talk about the system grants. One of the reasons that we're changing what used to be called the basic system grant to the public library allotment is because it has been very confusing to use grant in two entirely different ways. We've used competitive grant where you actually have to apply. There's a matching amount for that. With the public library allotment, that helps clarify that language. The public library allotment is the same thing as the old basic system grant. There's no change in that. We did put in that it is a 3-year cycle. There is always a great deal of confusion about that. Honestly, the easiest way for me to explain it to people is I move salt and pepper shakers around and all kinds of things. It's confusing to the consultants. It's confusing to the director. It's confusing to librarians, and it's really confusing to trustees, that 3-year project. And so one of the basic components now in the system plan will always be an explanation of that 3-year cycle. That was something that a librarian requested that we put in there because they have to explain it to their trustees every year. So go ahead and scroll down for us.
Mm-hmm. I break it down into 3 steps. Year 1, you plan and approve. Year 2, you earn. And in year 3, you receive.
Right.
So it's a
And it
very
is, of
basic way
course,
to
an
put it.
ongoing process. So this currently reflects the correct amounts for the public library allotment. If you look, this is a great deal larger than last year's basic system grant. And that is because what we've done is we've rolled over all of what used to be called the incentive grants, and we've added them to the public library allotment. We've then tied that to the standards that you need to make to earn it. And in fact, this has gone up. Last year, every library got $3,200 in the old incentives, and starting this year and moving forward, there will be $3,300. The per capita allotment is totally based on population. What had never been in a system plan before was where we got that information and what year it came from. Up at the very top of the proposed system, or the draft of the system plan, it talks about what year we're using and where we're getting that information from. It is from the Kansas Certified Population by the United Census Bureau as of April 1st, 2010. So we are now required to keep that current. When there is new information available, we will update your per capita grant. What will not ever happen with the per capita is that that number will never go down. If your community loses population, that number will not drop. We're not going to penalize you because people pass away or people move away. So when we talk about the chunk of money that you get from CKLS, it is the basic public library allotment plus what used to be all the standards, so it's plus $3,300, plus the per capita grant based on the 2010 census. Okay?
This 5,100 here for the Gateway Library, that is the base grant and the old incentive grant, which we are calling now the allotment. And then in addition to that would be the per capita grant.
That's right. That's right. Right now it's confusing to us because it's the first time we've ever seen it, but it really is easier for you to keep track of, and it's certainly easier for us to keep track of. You're still getting, public libraries are still getting a continuing education allotment. We had called that a grant before. This is something, and the per capita allotment, that you don't have to apply for. You're just going to get it. It's working the exact same way. Every eligible public library starts the year with $700. So if in year one, your library spends $700, in year two, you're going to get $700 more. If in year two, you only spend $200, CKLS assumes that that other $500 rolled over to the next year, and so in year three, you're only going to get $200. This is what is understood by every library receives $700. If you spend zero, you're not going to get $700 the next year. You start the year with $700. And that is the basic continuing education allotment. On top of these basic allotments, we also have competitive grants, same as always. They operate on a 3-year cycle. There is equipment, materials, and facilities. You can apply for as many competitive grants as you want. We also have the programming grant and continuing education grant and conference grants. Those you must apply for specifically. If you've received grants in one year, you may not be looked favorably on grant applications in future years. Remember that, I think it's up. If you scroll up just a little bit, please. There it is. Excuse me. Libraries can apply for as many competitive grants as wanted each year. A successful grant will make successive grants in the same and future years less competitive. Preference will be given to libraries that have not received this grant in previous years. I will tell you that last year, the Grant Overview Committee, the committee that chose who was going to win the big competitive grants, looked very carefully at what other grants libraries had received in that year and previous years, and that made a difference in their decisions. They also looked to see who was active in the system, and by active in the system, they wanted to know how many CE events that library went to. Were they doing everything they could to maximize the money from CKLS? The competitive grants all have a local matching amount. That has not changed. The amounts have not changed, and the matching grant has not changed. If you'll scroll down.
Gail, we did have a question to
Oh, yay.
Go over again why we changed the wording from grant to allotment again.
Okay. There has always been some confusion between what CKLS has across the board called everything as grants. It's largely semantics is the change. And so the public library allotment is not something that it's competitive or you need to fill out an application for every year. It is money that if you're eligible for state aid, you're eligible for the allotment and you're going to get it. The per capita, it's the same way. You don't need to fill out a grant application form. We just give it to you. It's the same with the $700 continuing education allotment. You don't have to fill out an application for it. We just give it to you. We kept the word grant for the competitive grants. So that is things like equipment, materials, facility. The conference grant, which actually doesn't have a matching amount, but you still need to apply for it. The extra continuing education grants you need to apply for. You need to state your cause. You're going to need to report back and say, this is what we learned, this is how it impacted my community, and the programming grant as well. That process is entirely different. For the competitive grants, there's an application process. In all except the conference grant, there is a local matching amount, and there is a reporting process on that. Does that help answer your question?
I think that's pretty clear, but we'll let you know if there's any more questions about
Absolutely. That. Absolutely. It is confusing to start with, but if you understand the philosophy behind the changes, that makes it a little bit easier. One of the things that I really want to make clear is that we did not pull this stuff out of thin air. A lot of these changes came directly from comments we've been hearing from our librarians and our trustees. So in 2019, there is a competitive materials or a collection development grant. This is the one for 2019. The last time we offered this, we had money left over because people applied for small amounts and not enough people applied. And so the thinking behind changing this to 20 grants of $1,000 each is because everyone who applied would have been able to easily use more money. And so $1,000 can make a difference in a library. $500, that's 8 large print books, 10 audio books, 10 playaways. It doesn't make that much of a difference. In order to be eligible for this grant, if you're a public library, you have to be eligible for state aid and you have to be eligible for your basic public library allotment. That's usually not a problem for any of our libraries.
Gail, I think another part of eligibility is this 3-year competitive grant cycle. The last step is to make sure you submit your report, which is due 3 years later. So if you haven't submitted your support for the last materials grant, which was in 2016, I still have a few outstanding. Make sure you get those in or you won't be eligible for this year, or for 2019's or this year's.
Or this year as well, correct. Yes. And that's the difference between an allotment and a grant. There is that filing requirement and that eligibility requirement with different qualifications. In this section about the materials grant for 2019, it gives you some deadlines. These are the exact same deadlines that we've used before through this process. Nothing has changed. The annual competitive conference grant, nothing has changed. Last year was the first time we were able to send 4 CKLS librarians to conference. We had 1 academic librarian, 1 school librarian and 2 public librarians go to these big conferences. While there is not a matching amount on this, there still is an application and a reporting component to the conference grants. Okay. The competitive continuing education grant, nothing has changed with this. There actually is one change. If you scroll down just a little bit right there. Oh, I need to see the sentence just above. Before, it was never stated, and so what we're just doing is clarifying it here. Public libraries who are applying for this continuing education competitive grant must have spent or encumbered their CE allotment before they can apply for the competitive grant. That was never stated before. This is just clarifying that information. The reason we added encumbered is because if you wanted to go to the Public Library Association conference in a couple of weeks in Philadelphia, registration opened for that last fall. And so what you could have done then is encumbered CE money that you got last year to put it towards the Public Library Association conference grant, and then you would have been eligible to apply for this. This is just clarifying it, and it's also taking into account that for some of these big conferences, you need to plan well in advance. Okay. Again, the total of money available is $19,000. Nothing has changed there. The annual programming grant, nothing has changed there. As it is this year, the total amount of money available is $3,000. Excuse me. I pushed Harry Willems, the previous director, to double that pot because that money goes very quickly and it is a very popular competitive grant. Again, something you need to apply for and report out.
And there's still some funds left. We've got several applications this last week, but there's still some funds left for this year's programming grant.
And when I was in Mary Beth's chair, I thought that we could make that amount $10,000 and it still wouldn't be enough because our CKLS libraries are really doing a great job on ramping up programming for all ages. The information on contracting libraries has been put in just for clarification. If you ever read through any of the old system grants, that information was all the way in the back. Nothing has changed here except the dollar amounts on processing for any contracting libraries. We updated that to be the processing ordered through CKLS. Those are the current charges from Ingram. There is no additional cost that CKLS passes on to you. And then processing from other vendors not through CKLS, those are things we actually have to manually process in-house, and that's a lowball cost estimate on that. Any questions there for contracting libraries before we get into the standards?
Gail, I'll just take this moment to double check if Zoom and Ro, who've come into the room, could put in the chat box which library they're from.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead because we do only have an hour for this. If you watch it today and you have more questions, you can certainly email Mary Beth and I and we'll answer those questions, or you can come back on Friday and we'll answer them for you again. If you'll just scroll back up, I want to see the bottom of the, there it is. So we're talking about the public library allotment standards. These standards were based on the incentives from last year. This year you still have your basic grant and your incentives. The incentives are $3,300. One of the things that we have noticed over the years is that, and we have heard from librarians that if there was an incentive grant that they felt would take more time to do than the money they received for doing it. They didn't think it was worth the money. There was also confusion in why didn't I get my money? Well, this is not stuff that you just get, this is stuff you have to earn. And so the public library allotment standards reflect that the joining together of the basic grant and the incentive grants into one total amount. We had libraries who would choose not to do summer library program because it cost more than $300. Or one of the things that I saw was a problem is that for some of those old incentive grants, we were asking for a huge body of work and giving you $200 for it if you did all the work. So these are things that we haven't made up. These standards come from the 2016 Public Library Standards. And these are things that, by and large, have been in system plans for many years. I think it's important that you read the first paragraph here. I'm going to read it out loud because it's that important. CKLS respects the authority of library boards as the governing and administrative body of the local library. This information has never been put into a system plan before. This is one of the basic governing tenets that CKLS works with. The board, in conjunction with the director, develops policies that become the basis for guiding the practices and decision-making of the library administration and ensures the rights and responsibilities of local libraries. Go ahead and scroll so I can see the next paragraph.
We have a question.
Oh, yes, please.
Each year, Joanna says, each year, could we have a list of awarded competitive grants and what they're for? I'd like to keep ideas for the future, and knowing what other libraries did helps spur ideas for us.
We can absolutely do that, Joanna. We can, because we keep track of that on our end, but we can certainly make that a document that anyone can view and take a look at and see what kinds of great ideas other libraries have had. So back on with this, the next paragraph, CKLS relates library activities and programs to quality service. Requirements for the allotment standards can change from year to year, just like the old incentives. Only because a lot of the incentives were not tied to the public library standard, people would wonder where they came from. And I had observed that we would put in an incentive to try to get maybe one library to start doing something. We're not doing that anymore. We're across the board. These are incentives that every modern public library, these are things they should be doing. Member public libraries must qualify for state aid. Mary Beth will put the link in for there to be eligible for the basic public library allotment. Now this is the paragraph. These public library allotment standards contain goals for libraries that reflect high yet reasonable public library standards of service, and we recognize the contributions that our libraries make to their local communities. If any one of the following standards is omitted, the public library allotment for that library will be diminished by 10%. This is not a number that we pulled out of the air. This is in fact a number that they use in the Northwest Kansas library system. In the Southeast Kansas library system, there is a very complicated percentage. If you don't do this particular standard, your public library allotment is reduced by 12%. Or if you do this one, it's reduced. If you don't do this one, it's reduced by 1%. Way too confusing. This is much easier. One of the concerns was that some of these standards were not realistic for small libraries. The public library standards were written by consultants, and I know that they kept in mind all libraries in Kansas. I also do not think it's fair that a library that is only open for 10 hours has to do the same things that a library that is open for 80 plus hours a week has to do. And I'm talking about things like filling out all the paperwork. That's a lot to ask in 10 hours a week. Mary Beth sent out a reply to Barb Langston, and that is something that I really want. I'm going to have her send out portions of that again. That's something that I really want everyone to be aware of. And it really talked about that at CKLS, we're compassionate. We understand that there are always going to be special circumstances. For instance, in Standard 1, if for whatever reason there was a blizzard in your community and nobody could leave to come to the May board meeting, that's something that we understand. If they can't make it, they can't.
Should we put something in there about proxies, or do we want to just let that be a case by case?
Every library has always been eligible to send a proxy to vote for the library. That can be a librarian, a library staff member, a board member. It can be a volunteer dragged in from the community. It does not have to be just the librarian or just the board members. It can be anyone.
As long as they have that proxy form.
They have the proxy and they need to vote the interest of the library. It can be a different person in May from who they send in August. The reason that Standard 1 is in here is multifold. And it ties into the reason that we're sharing this with you before it's even gone to our own executive committee. I'll state it positively. We believe that the system and what we do is governed by the executive committee, which is governed by the full system board. The full system board is who governs CKLS. Every library needs to take an active part in that governance. This is the only place where you get a full voice about what goes on in the system. Every library, I'll say again, needs to take place in that governance, and the only way to do it is by having a representative at full system board meetings. In May, we approved the system plan and the proposed budget. In August, the actual budget is approved. In the past, no librarian has had a lot of say-so in what goes into the budget or what goes into the system plan, and we're changing that. I think that it's critical that you understand why that is in there. Any questions on that one?
Also, I wanted to reiterate that this one is one that we think small libraries and large libraries alike, all libraries need to be a part of it, so that even if you're small and it's a challenge to be there, I think that this is one that you need to make that effort to be there. As it's affecting your library, so we want you to be there to have your vote and to have your stay. Just because you're small doesn't mean that that exempts you from this standard.
And I think if you're small, it's even more important.
I agree.
Because right now, the people who are working on CKLS, the director and your consultants, have a heart and a deep understanding of what it's like to be a small library. We're not always going to be here. The next people who come in may not share that understanding with us. And if you're not there to vote the interest of your small library or your medium-sized library, or even your large library, your voice might not be heard. One of the things that we will be exploring with this is that we may run the full system board meetings live on Zoom, and there is a voting component here. We have other ways of making things happen. We understand that sometimes it's hard to get away, or that a very important person in the community has passed away and everyone needs to go to the funeral. We know what life in small Kansas towns are like. So number 2, did the library staff, that's the librarian, if you're a solo librarian, the librarian and your assistants, whatever it is, attend a minimum of 6 library continuing education training events. They can be face-to-face or online. As you know, CKLS is offering more and more things online. This meeting would qualify as one of those events. This meeting would qualify as one of those events if you watched the recording later. The Summer Library Program Workshop is an event. Attending the Spring and the summer or fall business meetings is an event. We are not ever going to get rid of our face-to-face workshop offerings, but we are going to move things online as we reasonably are able to do so. I can't imagine putting Patty on a Zoom meeting the way she moves around, but we're looking at it. We're trying. This is just, we're asking you to list the events attended. Any questions on this one?
I have one. Do non-library events need to be pre-approved, such as if you're going to do a CPR or sign language class, or is there an event in your community that you think would be great for CE? Yeah, that needs to be pre-approved just so that when it comes up, we're expecting it, and we make sure that it's something that's going to be valuable to your library and to your community.
That's
oh, we muted again. Oh, I think we froze.
I can hear you, Mary Beth. I just can't hear Gail.
Gail, we can't hear you.
Yeah, Mary Beth, you're still there.
Okay. Let me try something, Gail. Oh, she's still frozen. Oh, Gail, we can't hear you. Okay. Okay, we're going to see if Andy looks like he's going to go help. So see if we can get her voice going on. Are there any questions right now while we're getting her sound fixed again?
Mary Beth, I will mention that it's important to understand that the standards that are on the system plan are not things that were created by CKLS. They are the Kansas Public Library standards.
Correct.
And a standard is a level of quality or a measurement that we all agree on, and that's from March.
Messing with that or not?
Yes. Okay, Gail, we can hear you. I did put in the chat box the Kansas Public Library standards, and on the first sheet of that should have the list of the people that were on that committee that helped make those standards happen. So go ahead and check that link.
I'm sorry you couldn't hear me. I was fidgeting with the cord of my headset, so now I pulled out my brain and I'll fidget with that instead. And I won't mute myself on purpose or on accident. Yes, in years past, librarians claimed, and rightly so, that the standards often wouldn't make sense, or why do we have to do this? There wasn't a clear response to that. And the response in the past may very well have been because CKLS says so. We want to make it very clear that these standards come directly from the Public Library Standards of 2016. Denise at Concordia has served on the standards committee, and they do change. They change regularly. I would probably guess at least every 4 years. Many years ago, one of the most important standards was that libraries needed to have a telephone, and they needed to have a fax machine, and then they needed to have computers. These standards evolve, and they recognize best practices for modern public libraries. Okay.
One question that I think was brought up in Chris Ripple's email that he sent out in Google Groups, if you want to just overview that, is how does the $700 CE allotment fit in with this standard too? Are they two separate ones, or are they the same thing?
So what we're asking is, okay, so they are two separate things.
Okay.
And let me get my brain together. Okay, the $700 continuing education allotment, remember it's an allotment, it's something you get, is to better enable the library to participate in continuing education events. If the library does not meet standard 2, by not attending 6 library continuing education events or pre-approved events, that $700, you're not going to be penalized from that $700. That $700 is an allotment, and it's going to stay with you over to the next year. What will happen, though, is that if a standard is not met, 10% comes off of your basic public library allotment. You will not get 10% off of your $700. The $700 is so that you are able to participate in the continuing education events. That's a separate thing that CKLS does. We call it an allotment. All of the other regional library systems call it a grant. You don't get $700. You have to apply for all CE money. It's all matching amounts, so depending on the size of your library, you have to pay for part of that, and there's a reporting component with that because it is a competitive grant. CKLS does that portion differently by putting $700 right into your library the beginning of every year. You don't have to apply for that allotment.
Okay.
Does that help answer that question?
I believe so, yes. All right, standard 3.
Standard 3. And this was one that we had a lot of questions on as well. Did a quorum of the library board participate in one continuing education event? So that can be having the quorum of the library board go to CKLS trustee training, or a local library training. Did you conduct a trustee orientation in the library? Or did your board watch one of the United for Libraries 15-minute videos on how to be a better board or how to work with your librarian?
Okay.
These are really broad.
They are, and then it says in there to send a copy of the minutes, because when you do board training, it should be reflected in your board minutes. So if you send just that one board meeting minutes from that one board meeting where the training happened or the training was mentioned, that would suffice for meeting
Absolutely.
the standard.
And that's because in the board minutes, you should put who's present and what happens. So this one is actually really easy to make if you look at it in a very broad scope. The local library will determine what kind of training they need. We're still going to encourage you to come to CKLS trustee training, especially those new board members. They find it so valuable. But we know that board members are often retired and they don't want to travel at night, or they're busy and working and they have young families, any number of reasons that they can't make it to a CKLS training event. What I would like to see CKLS do is send out a document or a link to a document that has just a broad and general list of different things that are available, available for boards to do at the local level. There is a lot of stuff available out there. Any questions on that?
I don't see any for that one, but I did have a request for more clarification of the CE $700 allotment and standard 2. So I'm going to try to rephrase it and see if I'm saying it correctly. So the 700 CE allotment, the $700 CE allotment is to help fund going to CE events or attending CE events. And that is separate from standard 2, which is going to 6 continuing education training events on online or face-to-face, which would be 10% of the allotment, or of your CE, 10% of, I want to use the right wording here, so I'm going to scroll up to it.
The public library annual allotment, I think, or something.
Yes. The public,
we're learning the language as well.
I want to get to the right one right here. So it would be 10% of this amount right here. The 21, 18,000, or 10,000. All right, so let me get back to
a question here.
Well, and let me say very quickly, one of the things that we also looked at was rolling that $700 into the basic allotment, that amount. That's not something that we chose to do because we wanted to make sure that that money was always available. Here's the reason why. If you have a librarian that does not participate in any continuing education events and she leaves in December and the new librarian comes on in, maybe she used everything and then she used it all up by June, the new librarian comes in September, we wanted to make sure that that money was still available to you and that you didn't have to go through a formal grant application and reporting process to have CE money. We believe so strongly that a well-trained board and a well-trained librarian are crucial for a healthy library. Andy, go ahead.
Are there any links to some videos that would qualify for trustees?
Yes, we will make a document and we will send that out. And
I will
some
send
of
it
them
out
are as short as, some of those are as short as 15 minutes. Remember, we're talking about 2019 now. So it's not something you have to start worrying about at this point. But what we've come to realize is that not everyone can attend CE events at CKLS or within the region. And that's one of the reasons we've started doing online content ourselves and allowing librarians to do online content for their CE as well. Watch those webinars. How you get the training is not as important as being trained.
And I would recommend the online training that you do is mentioned in your board minutes so that there's documentation of it.
Right, right. Some places will let you print a certificate.
That would work.
Yes. Remember, we're compassionate, understanding human beings, and if there are special circumstances, we're certainly going to take that into account. One of the things we're trying to do is take CKLS out of being the library police, the library KGB, as it were, and put these choices into local library hands. Standard number 4, directly from the public library standards, does the library actively lend and borrow on Share-it statewide interlibrary loan? We also struggled to find what actively lend and borrow meant. We wanted to have a definitive number, but that number doesn't exist anywhere in the standards, and we didn't make one up. Here is a definition of what the KIC Council, which is the council that oversees interlibrary loan in Kansas, defines as active lending, and the best practices that they say, which is checking statewide interlibrary loan every working day and making every effort to fill requests.
And Gail,
yes.
There's also each training that a librarian has, or a refresher training, this is brought up, and the training materials that come from Rhonda at the State Library all say to check interlibrary loan requests every working day. So it is something that everybody is very familiar with.
Yes, and it also is when they sign the KIC agreement form, which they have to sign to use the courier, they will be active in interlibrary loan and follow these best practices. Any questions on that one?
I don't see any yet. Andy will let us know. I did want to just emphasize that the trustee training and what we put in there is so valuable that it's worth every trustee going to, and it just gives you such valuable information that I want to encourage everybody to try to come to trustee training. We'll have 3 this year.
I think one of the very best things about trustee training is that, of course, we have an agenda and we have training content, but there is also unlimited question and answer opportunities, and well-trained trustees are critical to a well-run library. Standard 5 and Standard 6 caused a lot of discussion. Standard 5, and so I know that Patty is on here. Patty is sick, and I don't know if she'll even be able to talk, and I was fussing with my headphone cord again. Stop. These standards, Standard 5 has not changed. This is the same thing that was in this year's system plan, things that you need to be doing this year. So there are 3 parts for this standard. There are reasons for every single one of these parts as well, and they have nothing to do with CKLS. Well, number 1 does. Did the library submit a summer library program schedule, calendar, or marketing plan to the youth services consultant? If you've read through these standards, you realize that there is no marketing standard. Number 1 is one of the ways that we know that you're marketing this keystone library event to your community. That's simple. That is easier than doing 5 marketing opportunities. If you make a calendar in Library Aware and send that to Patty, that covers it. If you use the print calendar that's in your manual and you write it all in and send a copy to Patty, who is our current youth services library consultant, no plans on changing that, that covers it. Part 1 is incredibly simple to do. Part 2, did the library have a summer library program for elementary school age children K to 6? And part 3, did the library submit the summer library program evaluation before the deadline? Those two have nothing to do with CKLS, and in fact, they have nothing to do with the State Library of Kansas. You may not know, but all of the print materials and the manuals that are provided to you, along with money for the workshop presenter and some money to provide lunch at the workshop or to provide supplies at the workshop, are funded from an LSTA grant, which is Library Services and Technology Act grant, from IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. These are federal requirements, and by doing part 2 and part 3, you are fulfilling federal requirements so that funding for those print materials and the presenter are likely to continue. Do we have any questions on Standard 5?
No, but we do have one. I'll let Andy do it about about CE training.
Yeah.
Okay.
One librarian asked if some of the trustees go to a trustee training, does that count as one of the 6 CE trainings?
No. Scroll back up. You'll see that Standard 3 is trustee training and Standard 2 is library continuing education event. So if 4 of your trustees, or we'll say 3 of your trustees, go to a CKLS trustee training, that's not your quorum. But if the other ones participate in something locally, that makes a quorum and that meets Standard 3. If your librarian goes with the trustees to trustee training, a CKLS trustee training event, that will count for one of the events in Standard 2. Did I understand the question and did I explain it well?
So what you're saying is that if just the board goes to trustee training, that just fulfills the standard for trustee training. But if the librarian goes with the board to trustee training, then that can be counted as one of the 6 for the CE standard.
Absolutely, yes. We're trying to make it easier here. Okay, Standard 6, again, is directly from the 2016 Public Library Standards. This standard has 2 parts. The previous standard had 3 parts. This standard has 2 parts. Again, omitting any one part it means that 10% will be taken off of that allotment. So, number 1, does the library have story time for children, preschool age through elementary age children? We need to take out the 4 children because we've got the children aged twice there. We'll work on that. And part 2, did the library submit a brief storytime plan or calendar to the youth services consultant? I had some questions about, well, why do we have to submit the calendar? This again takes one of those 5 marketing things for you earned it $20 a piece and rolls it into a larger standard. Submitting your storytime calendar or plan is also a way to market your library services. And again, when we think about traditional library services, and this goes all the way back to the 1800s, 2 of the very first services that libraries ever offered were storytime for children and summer library program of some kind. I'm sure nearly everyone on the webinar and people who are going to watch the recording had a storytime experience as a child, and they had a summer library program experience as a child. These 2 standards are so important that they are specifically mentioned in the standards. So that's a little bit of the history here. 2 or more storytime sessions per week count as one program is for those really big libraries like Salina or even Great Bend, where they may offer the same story time, the exact same content, same puppets, same songs, more than once a week. It counts as one. Story time need not happen in your library. It can happen in a preschool, but it needs to be open to the public. The standards talk about the target audience is your local community. That's why they need to be open to the public. Now, to meet the standard, libraries must do the following regularly scheduled storytime programs per year. This little bit right here comes from CKLS tradition. In the Youth Services Guidelines, they do not mention a specific amount of story time that needs to happen, and in the public library standards, they do not mention that. But CKLS has had this requirement of these specific numbers of things for well over 10 years. One of the things that I have asked Patty to do is to take those public library youth services guidelines and retool them for CKLS so that they, and that will probably be done by committee with librarian involvement still, but they can then include these storytime program guidelines in those standards for CKLS. So this number is not something that exists in the standards, but it is tradition and it is a CKLS best practice.
And it should be noted that these numbers for the minimum programs were lowered in 2013.
Yes, they were. If you'll scroll back up.
Oh, sorry.
The discussion about Standard 6 has been all about story time for children. In the public library standards, it does talk about programming for all ages, but and in our own CKLS goals, it talks about programming for all ages. But programming for teens and adults is actually, especially adults, is actually fairly new to most public libraries in Kansas, in central Kansas. That is just not something that we've done a lot of. This standard is here because story time is a traditional program service that libraries offered to the public. Remember that we are compassionate and understanding human beings. We can look at the census and see how many children live in your community. We can look at the school, public school reports and see how many children go to preschool at the school. We know that in some communities, it is hard to do story time. That's a discussion we're going to have about offering alternatives. This is what's in here for right now. Patty, do you want to chime in on this?
Hi, this is Patty. I'm sorry, they're replacing a back door, so I can't. I've got lots of noise in my house, and I got cats running loose. So, yes, this was chosen long before me, and if you've been with CKLS a long time, this is not new to you. The Storytime is kind of the first mark for library programming. Pretty much anywhere, if you don't do anything else, this is kind of where you start. Will we have to make some modifications? Perhaps. We wanted this out there. We want you to look at it. We want you to see that Storytime has evolved. It's called Storytime, but when you've been to one of our workshops in the last couple of years, you've heard that Storytime is part of Yoga Storytime. It's part of STEAM Storytime. It's part of Exercise Storytime. It's not come in, sit on a carpet square, listen to 2 stories, sing goodbye, farewell, and amen, and go home. It has evolved a lot, and you as CKLS librarians have been a part of that change. You've embraced it. And so We know that we're going to have to perhaps modify some wording or perhaps do some special conversations. However, it is integral to providing early literacy standards for your little people, and that's little people from birth to 18. But if we don't focus on this time up through grade school, the chances of them getting the experience out of library service dwindles every year if we don't focus on what they need to learn how to use the library and those vital early literacy standards. So
Thank
take
you.
a look, read it from the way it's written.
I would also add that in the public library standards, there is a standard on advocacy, which we have not included here. Advocacy is speaking up for your library, talking to stakeholders in your community or at the state level about the important things that your library is doing. Some of your best library supporters, you might not ever see them. Statistics and surveys have shown again and again that when people support the library, it's because they have good memories as a child of story times. So that kind of also is the very first time that we get to advocate for our libraries. We have had a lot of discussion on this standard, and this is something that we're going to look at. The main concern was, why aren't we getting credit for doing adult programming or all ages programming? And we'll address those. Go ahead, on down to number 7.
All right.
Woohoo! This is directly from the standard. Does the library have an internet website and or social media site that is actively maintained and contains current information about library services and programs? CKLS has entered into our 2nd year or 3rd. We've done 3 workshops now, I think, on how to build a library website with WordPress. We will continue with those workshops. We've also done a number of workshops on how to build a library Facebook page. This is 2018. This is how the public seeks information, and this is how we need to, and again, market the library. These marketing standards are far more valuable now to your library than they were at $20 a piece. We didn't actually have any buzz about that one. And then standard 8, does the library have a continuous weeding program? And were a minimum of 3% of the materials in the collection withdrawn each year? This again is not a new standard. This has been, the 3% has been in the system plan for a couple of years, right, Mary Beth?
It was in 2017. This standard was there, but it was just 3/4 of a shelf. In 2018, it gave the quantitative 3%, and then that's what we're repeating again for 20.
Right, and before 2017, it was 2% for many years. So 2%. A healthy library collection will naturally weed itself by more than 2%. Those are going to be the things that are borrowed but never returned, things that are damaged, things that get worn out and are no longer fit for circulation. 3% is the librarian taking an active role in maintaining that collection. You can certainly go read the standard on that, but it is now 3%. This was a question that garnered a lot of discussion. I believe Joanna said that they don't really weed that way. They may weed a lot in one part of the library one year and just a small amount in the library another year. We're not talking specifically about each collection, we're talking about the overall library. To me, I'm telling you that this would also include finally getting rid of the box after box after box of National Geographic magazines that are stored in the basement. This is getting rid of the materials that are downright dangerous to have on your shelf. Anything medical or legal older than 5 years old. This includes getting rid of computer books that are talking about DOS and XP. These are the things that need to be removed from your library regularly. Any book that was written on AIDS from the 80s needs to be out of your collection. I ran a little bit of math, and because we're always thinking about our 10 to 20 hour a week libraries. If a librarian spends 30 minutes a month on one section, and that's very easy to do, that's running a superweeder and sorting that spreadsheet by the things that are the oldest that haven't circulated and pulling them off the shelf. 30 minutes a month times 12 is 360 minutes. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of collection maintenance that would have been done in 3 years, or in 1 year. It would exceed the 3%.
And the superweeder that Gail is referring to is a saved report under inventories list on Koha, and there's it brings up all the items in your collection by call number or by shelving location or by collection, depending on the superweeder you choose, and it shows you when they were last seen and when they were last circulated.
And how many times an item circulated.
Exactly.
And on some of them, they'll show when it was added to the collection, which is nice because at this point, most of our Pathfinder libraries, if you have things that haven't circulated since you came on Pathfinder, they're just taking up shelf room and they probably aren't going to circulate. Some libraries like to weed, some librarians like to weed and weed well in excess of 3%. Some do not, and 3% is the minimum standard in the public library standards. I had somebody ask why 8 standards. We could have added more, but we thought this was more than enough to ease into this sort of a new way of doing things. Next year, we probably will ask about the level of community involvement. If you read the public library standards, you'll be able to see easily that that is something that is in there. We're 12 minutes over. Does anybody have any more questions or comments?
We had the comment that any online catalog will have a report like the super weeder, which we were referring to,
Absolutely,
which shows
yes.
you how much your collection is circulating.
And the vendors are very helpful. If your ILS, you can't find it easily, get in touch with your vendor and they'll help you with that report.
Thank you.
Yes. Remember again that this is the very first time that we have asked for your active involvement in preparing a system plan. I think you need to realize that that was a very brave step on our part. It's never been done, and so we're charting, we're steering through uncharted waters, but because the full system board does approve the system plan, we really felt it was important that our librarians have a chance to understand what we're talking about, have a chance to have questions answered, air concerns so that we could readdress those in the system plan before it goes to a vote in May. If there are no further comments, I think we can say goodbye. And if you want to watch us again on Friday, it's probably going to be different content, different questions people will ask.
And it will be recorded on Friday as well. And I also just wanted to say that after our meeting on Friday, we are going to go back into this draft and tweak it and take your comments into account, and we'll send it out again, and so you'll look for it again in April. And if it looks like we need more discussion in April, we will have some more Zoom meetings in April.
You know what, Mary Beth, can you scroll to the end? Does it have the questions for the system grant here at the end? I think it does.
Does it? Nope, it doesn't yet.
We'll make sure to put those up. I think that when you see what the reporting at the end of the year is for these standards, you're going to be shocked, actually. It might take you 10 minutes to do it. You don't need to submit a budget. The only things you have to report are, yes, did you submit the Storytime and Summer Library Program calendar? Send us the URL for your website or your social media page. Yes or no, did you weed by a minimum of 3%? Yes, the quorum of the trustees received 1 training. Here are the board minutes. And yes, the librarian attended 6 CE events, list them. It's going to be so much shorter and so much faster. You don't need to fill out the certificate of eligibility form. We're not requiring that you account for how you spent last year's funds and how you plan to spend the next year's CKLS money. It's just really short and sweet. Again, we really keep in mind those 10 to 20-hour libraries. That is the bulk of CKLS. That is our heart and soul here.
We do have a comment saying, "Yay, less paperwork!" And
I hope so.
We're trying to make it easier. And I know it's kind of daunting to think of that 10%, but we really think that these standards are achievable from the smallest library to the biggest library.
One of the things that Mary Beth and I did was analyze the past years of what incentives were done and what weren't, and nearly all of these were completed. The only one that wasn't is we have a library that doesn't participate in interlibrary loan, and some libraries may have chosen not to do a summer library program or a story time. But by and large, these are the things that most of our libraries are already doing. And I congratulate you on that, because I know that you're providing exemplary public library service to even the smallest of your communities. Okay. Thank you for being here, and I hope you have a great day. Listen, if you've got any questions, you can send it out to the CKLS members group, and we will respond to that. I would prefer that it go on a public forum, because we're going to answer questions that other people are going to have. Thank you for being here. I'm going to shut my machine down.
And yes, again, if you have any more questions, just send us an email and we'll respond to them on the CKLS Google groups. Okay.